लाइफ में लेना देना तो चलता रहता है। इधर फ्लेक्सी लोन से बोरो कर लिया और उधर बाय मॉम डैड का वेकेशन डन। शादी का डिसीजन लिया, फ्लेक्सी लोन से और बोरो किया। प्रमोशन मिला तो ये लो थोड़ा लोन वापस कर दिया। थैंक यू। नए इंटीरियर्स का डील किया, फ्लेक्सी लोन से फिर थोड़ा ले लिया। ईयर एंड बोनस मिला तो इस बार लोन ज्यादा वापस कर दिया। लाइफ में लेना देना चलता रहेगा तो लोन्स में क्यों नहीं। इसीलिए फ्लेक्सी लोन फ्रॉम बजाज फिनसर्व एक ऐसा लोन जो जब चाहे बोरो करें, जैसे चाहे रीपे करें, वो भी चुटकी में। थिंक इट डन विद बजाज फिनसर्व।
हेलो, हर सीजन के लिए नए इंटीरियर्स?
हाँ, वो भी हर रूम के लिए।
फ्रिज, स्मार्टफोन या बड़ा टीवी?
तीनों क्यों नहीं?
अरे ये तो शॉपिंग लिस्ट में नहीं था।
सो अब शॉपिंग कार्ट में तो है। सॉरी।
अच्छा, नए आउटफिट्स की विश लिस्ट।
विश क्यों? जस्ट ऐड टू कार्ट एंड बाय।
तो ये सब EMI पे?
और वो भी चुटकी में। On India's fastest growing EMI network. Think it done with Bajaj Finserv.
सर, अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान हो ही नहीं सकता। साहब, अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान हो ही नहीं सकता। हुजूर, अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान हो ही नहीं सकता।
अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान।
अपनों को खुशियां दिलाना आसान नहीं बनाते तो आगे कैसे बढ़ते। इसीलिए हम जो भी करते हैं उसे बेहतर बनाते आ रहे हैं, बनाते रहेंगे। बजाज फिनसर्व, थिंक इट डन।
माँ के बेडरूम का एसी या लेटेस्ट मोबाइल फॉर भाई, लेटेस्ट मोबाइल फॉर भाई, लेटेस्ट मोबाइल फॉर भाई। पुणे, पटना, चेन्नई, मथुरा या फिर बेगूसराय, या फिर बेगूसराय। नए घर के लिए चाहिए 4K टीवी हाई फाई, या फिर वाइफ को चाहिए लेटेस्ट स्टाइल। EMI है ना, EMI है ना, EMI। मॉड्यूलर किचन में पुराना फ्रिज क्यों है भाई?
शादी है नहीं, मैट्रेस पुराना है भाई। अक्खा इंडिया बोले भाई प्राइजेस है हाई। बेस्ट ही खरीदना है तो अपने EMI स्टोर पर आए।
EMI है ना, EMI।
अब काशी हो या वाशी, महंगा लगे तो EMI और बेस्ट ही चाहिए तो भी EMI, क्योंकि बजाज फिनसर्व का EMI है ना। विजिट www.emistore.com।
EMI है ना, EMI है ना, EMI।
धोखा है धोखा, धोखा ना खाओ जी। इंश्योरेंस फ्रॉड से बचना है बहुत जरूरी जी। वो एजेंट है या फ्रॉड पता लगाओ जी। एक्स्ट्रा ऑफर के झांसे में कहीं फंस ना जाओ जी। अगर कोई अनजान कॉलर इंश्योरेंस पॉलिसी डिटेल्स मांगे तो कह देना उनको मिलके स्कैम को एंड करो, हमेशा सेफ रहो जी। Always verify the caller and do not surrender your insurance for attractive offers. हमेशा सावधान रहे, safe रहे. Issued in the interest of public awareness by Bajaj Finserv. धोखा है धोखा, धोखा ना खाओ जी।
जो होगा सो होगा ऐसे ना सोचो जी कॉल पे कोई पूछे ओटीपी दो ना जी तो कह देना उनको मिलके स्कैम को एंड करो हमेशा सेफ रहो जी
Being a hero is all about heart. It's not about ruling the world. It's about owning it. It's not about winning a race. It's about delivering a smile to the human race. It's about a spirit that just cannot be confined by geographies. It's about the heart that beats for the future and a soul that echoes the values of generations. And yet, being a hero is never about the hero. It's about the millions who celebrate them. Hero Motorcorp, the motorcycle leader. There's a gush of wind that hums a sweet song. There's a gush of wind that fights like a hero to fill the world with possibility. There's a gush of wind that jumps across oceans and mountains, embracing the entire planet. There's a gush of wind that blows away darkness. There's a gush of wind that blows for humanity. Because at Hero, we care.
In 1868, the Tata Group was founded on a philosophy that put the community at the heart of its existence. Today, we are $100 billion global enterprise. Our today has been built on enduring values. Today is about delivering excellence across business sectors. Today is about building a future-ready nation. Our today has a strong foundation with community at its core. Our today is dedicated to the communities we serve. Today is always about more than just today. Our today is a continuous journey for a better tomorrow. Tata, leadership with trust.
Behold, the story of victory, of life over malady. Behold the saga of power, of science over sickness. Behold the tale of triumph, of dedication over disease. Behold the rise and rise of Cadila Pharmaceuticals Limited, one of India's largest privately held pharmaceutical companies based out of Ahmedabad, Gujarat, India. Cadila Pharmaceuticals was born out of the vision of a legend who left an indelible mark in the chronicles of Indian pharmaceuticals industry. He was Indravardhan Ambalal Modi, the founder chairman of the company, rightfully christened as the medicine man of India. His vision to alleviate pain of the underprivileged through research-driven innovations has been driving Cadila Pharmaceuticals for more than 6 decades now. Innovations which are backed by the key strengths of the company, the state-of-the-art manufacturing and research facilities. The flagship manufacturing facility at Dholka, Gujarat, sprawls over 100 acres. This avant-garde facility is US FDA approved, besides meeting most of the stringent quality standards across the globe. It manufactures tablets, capsules, injectables, liquids, and orals. The second formulations manufacturing facility is located at Samba in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. The API facilities at Ankleshwar, Gujarat, manufacture a large number of key APIs and intermediates at this US FDA and ISO 9002 and ISO 14001 accredited plant. The company also has set up its first ever overseas formulation manufacturing facility at Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. This world-class facility is the only WHO CGMP compliant manufacturing facility in the region. More than 850 products spread across 12 specialties with many of India's top brands in its basket. Great goals are defined by far-sighted vision and achieved by seamless teamwork. A multicultural, multilingual and multinational workforce of over 7,000 employees is truly the propelling power of the company. Not just in the domestic market, the company has a wide global footprint with over 1,000 marketing authorizations across 85 countries. Its international sales force of over 150 highly diversified and versatile personnel lends it an outreach that blankets the globe. As the company grows, so does its commitment to research. Manned by more than 350 scientists, the R&D facilities of Cadila Pharmaceuticals at Dholka, Gujarat is an institution of breakthrough innovations. To take the focus on innovation to the next level, it partners with leading international companies to discover newer treatments. The Cadila Pharmaceuticals Group is gigantic. Its group companies complement and expand the dynamic vision of the company across new avenues of healthcare and newer fast-paced business areas. Cadila Pharmaceuticals is a gentle giant. Decades of dedicated research, groundbreaking healthcare innovations, and worldwide impact proves the infinite potential of one powerful emotion. Care. The success of Cadila Pharmaceuticals bears testimony to the fact that the care continues.
आने वाले कल की दस्तक हमें सुनाई देती है, नई मंजिल है जिस ओर हमें वो दिशा दिखाई देती है। नए इंडिया का नया जोश, नए इंडिया का नया जोश, नए जोश से निकल पड़े हम, आने वाला कल होगा हमारा। नए इंडिया का नया जोश।
और नए इंडिया के सफर में टेक्नोलॉजी की शक्ति लेकर आपका भागीदार रहेगा रिलायंस। नए इंडिया का नया जोश।
लाइफ में लेना देना तो चलता रहता है। इधर फ्लेक्सी लोन से बोरो कर लिया और उधर बाय मॉम डैड का वेकेशन डन। शादी का डिसीजन लिया, फ्लेक्सी लोन से और बोरो किया। प्रमोशन मिला तो ये लो थोड़ा लोन वापस कर दिया, थैंक यू। नए इंटीरियर्स का दिल किया, फ्लेक्सी लोन से फिर थोड़ा ले लिया। ईयर एंड बोनस मिला तो इस बार लोन ज्यादा वापस कर दिया। लाइफ में लेना देना चलता रहेगा तो लोन्स में क्यों नहीं। इसीलिए फ्लेक्सी लोन फ्रॉम बजाज फिनसर्व एक ऐसा लोन जो जब चाहे बोरो करे, जैसे चाहे रीपे करे, वो भी चुटकी में। थिंक इट डन विद बजाज फिनसर्व।
हेलो, हर सीजन के लिए नए इंटीरियर्स?
हाँ, वो भी हर रूम के लिए।
फ्रिज, स्मार्टफोन या बड़ा टीवी?
तीनों क्यों नहीं?
अरे ये तो शॉपिंग लिस्ट में नहीं था।
सो अब शॉपिंग कार्ट में तो है। सॉरी।
अच्छा, नए आउटफिट्स की विश लिस्ट।
विश क्यों? जस्ट ऐड टू कार्ट एंड बाय।
तो ये सब EMI पे?
और वो भी चुटकी में। On India's fastest growing EMI network. Think it, done with Bajaj Finserv.
सर, अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान हो ही नहीं सकता। साहब, अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान हो ही नहीं सकता। हुजूर, अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान हो ही नहीं सकता।
अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान।
अपनों को खुशियां दिलाना आसान नहीं बनाते तो आगे कैसे बढ़ते। इसीलिए हम जो भी करते हैं उसे बेहतर बनाते आ रहे हैं, बनाते रहेंगे। बजाज फिनसर्व, थिंक इट, डन।
माँ के बेडरूम का एसी या लेटेस्ट मोबाइल फॉर भाई, लेटेस्ट मोबाइल फॉर भाई, लेटेस्ट मोबाइल फॉर भाई। पुणे, पटना, चेन्नई, मथुरा या फिर बेगूसराय,
या फिर बेगूसराय।
नए घर के लिए चाहिए 4K टीवी हाई फाई, या फिर वाइफ को चाहिए लेटेस्ट स्टाइल। EMI है ना, EMI है ना, EMI।
मॉड्यूलर किचन में पुराना फ्रिज क्यों है भाई?
शादी है नहीं, मैट्रेस पुराना है भाई। अक्खा इंडिया बोले भाई प्राइजेस है हाई, बेस्ट ही खरीदना है तो अपने EMI स्टोर पर आए।
EMI है ना, EMI।
अब काशी हो या वाशी, महंगा लगे तो EMI और बेस्ट ही चाहिए तो भी EMI, क्योंकि बजाज फिनसर्व का EMI है ना। विजिट www.emistore.com।
EMI है ना, EMI है ना, EMI।
नाची 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 नाची। धोखा है धोखा, धोखा ना खाओ जी। नाची 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 नाची। इंश्योरेंस फ्रॉड से बचना है बहुत जरूरी जी। नाची 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 नाची। वो एजेंट है या फ्रॉड पता लगाओ जी, एक्स्ट्रा ऑफर के झांसे में कहीं फंस ना जाओ जी।
अगर कोई अनजान कॉलर इंश्योरेंस पॉलिसी डिटेल्स मांगे तो कह देना उनको।
नाची 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 नाची। मिलके स्कैम को एंड करो, हमेशा सेफ रहो जी।
Always verify the caller and do not surrender your insurance for attractive offers. हमेशा सावधान रहे, safe रहे. Issued in the interest of public awareness by Bajaj Finserv.
नाची 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 नाची। धोखा है धोखा, धोखा ना खाओ जी। नाची 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 नाची। जो होगा सो होगा, ऐसे ना सोचो जी। नाची 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 नाची। कॉल पे कोई पूछे OTP दो ना जी,
तो कह देना उनको।
नाची 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 नाची। मिलके स्कैम को एंड करो, हमेशा सेफ रहो जी।
Being a hero is all about heart. It's not about ruling the world. It's about owning it. It's not about winning a race. It's about delivering a smile to the human race. It's about a spirit that just cannot be confined by geographies. It's about the heart that beats for the future and a soul that echoes the values of generations. And yet, being a hero is never about the hero. It's about the millions who celebrate them. Hero a motor corp, the motorcycle leader. There's a gush of wind that hums a sweet song. There's a gush of wind that fights like a hero to fill the world with possibility. There's a gush of wind that jumps across oceans and mountains, embracing the entire planet. There's a gush of wind that blows away darkness. There's a gush of wind that blows for humanity. Because at Hero, we care.
In 1868, the Tata Group was founded on a philosophy that put the community at the heart of its existence. Today, we are $100 billion global enterprise. Our today has been built on enduring values.
We are actually live.
Oh, okay.
Bharat, please start.
Okay, so thank you everybody for joining us here today. Good afternoon, both in India and Singapore, to all of our dear viewers, and for anybody in other parts of the world, good evening, good morning, and again, thanks for this joining us for this very fascinating discussion. I have immense pleasure in welcoming the Group CEO of PSA International, or the Ports Authority of Singapore, Mr. Tan Chong Meng. Chong Meng to friends and to me, we are now on first name basis. And this essentially, as you're aware, is one of the highlights, for me personally, but also one of the true highlights of this 27th edition of the CII Partnership Summit 2021. And this session, entitled Transforming Global Supply Chains, Advancing World Trade Sustainability, we are going to be interacting with Mr. Tan Chong Meng, on the evolving nature of international supply chains in the post-pandemic world, with renewed policy focus on enhancing resilience and sustainability, or as it's now called, leniency and resiliency in some ways, in the logistics sector. Mr. Meng spearheads the operations not only of one of the leading global port groups, he is also responsible for managing complexity, diversity, and the breadth of global value chains for so many of their customers. Equally impressive is his role as the co-chair of the Emerging Stronger Task Force, a committee set up by the Singapore government. Mr. Meng also plays an instrumental role in guiding the nation's economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. Sir, we look forward to learning from your wide gamut of experiences in supply chains and trade facilitation during the session proceedings. With governments across the globe adopting concerted strategies encompassing vaccination rollouts, economic stimulus packages, and subsidizing pandemic restrictions for mitigating the impact of COVID-19 pandemic, there has been a positive trend in international trade coupled with the recovery, a strong recovery in demand. The latest UNCTAD projections, which show trade and growth in services reaching a $28 trillion mark for the year, which is rather commendable given it's an 11% rise compared with pre-COVID-19 levels, and is the greatest testimony of the reviving business sentiment of the international trading community. As trade flows are increasing and growth is on the upward trajectory in manufacturing as well as services sector, one cannot but overemphasize the role of reinvigorating supply chains that support this global recovery. Greater competitiveness and improved operational efficiencies also are equally subjects that are matters of public discourse today. The need of the hour is therefore creating robust supply chains which are characterized by both flexibility and responsibility. With emphasis on strengthening these supply chains and value chains, it's crucial to address topical concerns, and the most important one is the international container shortage. This has led to rising freight rates. Well, when I say rising astronomically in many cases, and especially for the key shipping routes, owing to faster than expected recovery, leading to a delay of shipments and consequent liquidity concerns. Some economies are also facing logistics worker shortages and a lack of key components as well as raw materials for manufacturing. The global supply chains have also been responding to trade tensions, as most companies are adopting the China Plus One strategy and are moving to low-cost production economies, which is an opportunity that needs to be leveraged on by developing a more effective logistics sector. Additionally, there have been fundamental changes in consumer behavior and routes to market are being realigned. It is, therefore, pivotal to accelerate value chain transformation that helps address any possible uncertainty and supplement the economy rebound. In light of these recent developments, I would like to highlight some key recommendations for effectively rebuilding supply chains. First, developments in technology, such as we were discussing earlier with PSA's Unbox initiative, but also the advent of artificial intelligence and blockchain, which can and should be used for supply chain innovation. It is important to work towards implementing digital and end-to-end supply chain across planning, procurement, manufacturing, and logistics, which will help drive efficiencies, enhance transparency, and also open new revenue streams. Second, it is imperative to have supply chains that integrate elements and practices pertaining to environmental protection, product sustainability, and greener growth. The future is of a circular economy which envisages zero product wastage during transportation and manufacturing. Policymakers must explore and are exploring ways to redesign and re-engineer strategies to achieve the circular and fossil-free economy to build a more environment-friendly global value chain. Third, for creating a secure supply chain, policymakers must balance demands while considering cost efficiency by promoting a more diversified supplier base, which is both flexible as well as economical. Authorities may consider signing more trade agreements, conceptualizing FTAs, and formulating country agreements for supporting this approach. In sum, all stakeholders of international trading community must come together to adopt a holistic way forward for reinventing supply chains that provide sufficient flexibility to protect against future disruptions, along with a responsive and resilient risk management system for mitigating the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, with that, I would like to conclude my opening remarks, and this is really what we've all logged in for. Over to Mr. Tan Chong Meng for his views. Sir, we await to hear from you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Bharat, for the introduction as well as for those opening remarks. So just to recap a couple of them, which I think we'll explore further in this dialogue. There's one, you mentioned some real short-term challenges, lack of containers, escalated freight rates, but you also highlighted a few key must-dos: use technologies, be concerned about environmental protection, and look at diversifying supplier base. I think the key is how. We know quite a number of challenges as well as the theories on the actions we must take, but how do we take it? Because in many of those instances, it's not linear action, but collective action, or singular action, but collective. So good afternoon, everyone. And thank you once again for inviting me to this very prestigious summit. And I looked at the overall agenda and the sessions, and I must congratulate Bharat, yourself, and all other organizers for putting together something that is so useful to the industry and to government alike. What we want to explore in our session is how we can transform global supply chains to advance world trade sustainably, and basically to seize the opportunities ahead of us to do even better. So to set the context for our dialogue, let me just say a few words about the mega supply chain undercurrents that we know of in the world today. No surprise. The first is COVID-induced supply chain disruptions are real, they're serious, and they are global in nature. And I want to emphasize the last bit, global in nature. There are pockets, but as a whole, when you add it up, it's a global problem. Many headlines about supply chain disruptions have been dominating the news, and the most frequently asked question is, what is the cause? Is there any single one? Bharat mentioned lack of containers, insufficient shipping capacity, manpower shortages, reduced worker productivity, intermodal connections breaking down, non-digital documentation, so many culprits in the whole chain. All these are glitches, the list goes on. Actually, it's a bit of everything, depending on the environment or the situation that a particular location is in. Suffice to say, there's enough to cause a glitch, and that glitch can, because supply chain is a continuous activity, can affect other points around the world and potentially amplify issues that are felt elsewhere. And one KPI that stands out is the rate of circulation of containers. Pre-COVID, containers were used about 6 times a year. That's average industry data. Today, maybe 5. And just that one difference is huge in terms of the number of containers needed that are not immediately available. And in fact, injecting more containers into the supply chain reality today without restoring flow is not necessarily going to solve the problem. In fact, it could exacerbate the current issues, which are unreliability of schedules and congested nodes. A supply chain is a system of hubs and flows at different levels, port level, hinterland level, global and local. Many of these disruptions today at either one of these locations are short-term in nature and episodic. I believe as the world moves to endemicity, and if we all do our part to restore flow quickly, I believe actually the whole system will recover. Just like how shipping and cargo movement normalized actually fairly quickly after the Suez incident in March this year. And Bharat, I believe in that scenario, freight rates could also start to ease. I suppose the big question is when, rather than how. I think how it's fairly natural in the system to heal itself. The question is, at what point will the supply, demand, and the capacity triangle balance to create a better environment? Now, PSA is a global terminal operator and also a cargo solutions provider with 60 terminals in over 26 countries. And as you know, we have several in India as well. And we've been doing our best to keep key logistic nodes, our ports and other supply chain activities open and efficient, to keep short-term disruptions at a minimum, keep them from getting worse, and to do our part to ensure the seamless movement of goods. In India, we also help to keep India trade going with our coastal terminals in Mumbai, Kolkata, Chennai, and Tutti. And we serve India's vast hinterland through Amia Logistics and Honeycomb Logistics, the facilities that they have, with cargo solutions as well. One activity that has grown rapidly during the last 2 years in India is the demand for rail freight. And I believe this trend will continue. So amidst the disruption of the pandemic, people are looking for new solutions and interestingly experimenting with perhaps for the future, more sustainable ones. And this is a positive development. The question, however, is whether as a whole logistics system, we are able to gather these good lessons and to build on them, to build the type of infrastructure needed in the future that is more sustainable and more reliable. Or will we go back to our old ways of doing because we heave a sigh of relief that we are now in endemicity and we can do things as we have always done? So the first undercurrent is COVID, and how can we really use the lessons from COVID to build something better? The second undercurrent is the emphasis on the resilience of supply chains. Yes, having diversification of supply sources is one, but we must acknowledge that over the last few decades, many value chains in manufacturing, production, and distribution have grown in length, in complexity, because they were designed for efficiency, for cost, for proximity to markets, and trying to tap on what the world had to offer in terms of having a competitive business base to serve their customers. But many of these companies are now taking a much broader view. While the objectives that I mentioned just now remain important, more industry players are considering the complete end-to-end dynamics of supply chain choices, even strategies, to become more disruption and pandemic resilient in future. Technology and changing customer preferences are also other instigators that are urging the change towards more agile supply chain solutions. And then there is a third undercurrent, climate sustainability. We see it being embraced and tackled faster than ever before. Indeed, sustainability has bolted onto center stage. Consumers, society, and governments are demanding supply chain solutions that are climate friendly and global trade that is sustainable. By now, compared to a few years ago, governments and companies representing more than 70% of global GDP have articulated greenhouse gas abatement goals of varying magnitudes and timelines, but broadly convergent in intent. Most companies have started monitoring their greenhouse gas emissions, and beyond looking at reducing their individual scope 1-2 emissions, companies are now taking an end-to-end perspective in addressing emissions in their suppliers and customers' value chains. Now, this calls for business leaders to come together, know each other's sector, and as a result, we see more collective efforts to catalyze action across sectors and thereby to engage policymakers on transitioning to the net zero economy. So you could say it's glass half full, half empty. I would say it's half full and filling. Now, in dealing with these three undercurrents covering short and longer term, countries and companies that are able to transform themselves and their supply chains will see the greatest opportunities to grow and to compete on the world stage. So the change we need is not just for existential reasons or even altruistic ones, but offers good commercial sense. Now that's the context. The fundamental key to dealing with all this is, I believe, in one nutshell, purposeful partnerships. And that's what I think CII helps us with as well. Because in our business, whether we talk about the grand term supply chain or the more specific logistics, which is the activity that we perform, ultimately it's a team sport. We cannot go far if we leave anyone behind, and we have to do our part to have everybody progress together as an ecosystem. So purposeful partnerships, fundamental. But what can we do? Where should we partner, and what do we want to solve together? I offer two key steps towards the new world. One, defragmenting the supply chain or defragmenting supply chain through digital solutions and partnerships. Digitalization holds the promise of enabling this team or partnership effort for greater efficiency and transparency. And with that, the ability to act to achieve more resilient and sustainable supply chains. But in order to achieve the full benefits of digital solutions that can help business, say, run scenarios, assess trade-offs, accelerate responses, reduce resource wastage from inefficiencies, or even change the economics of their production, we also need a seamless flow of data through the entire value chain. So not to be misunderstood with the infrastructure and the system requirement, the data as a resource is a whole different ballgame. And so when we talk about digitalization, if we want to think of digitalization for the ecosystem, it is implicitly important that we deal with the data challenge as well. And hence, we need collaboration. Because the inconvenient truth is that we are still in a world of multiple and diverse legacy operational systems, data transfer modalities, regulatory standards, business models. In supply chain, we have not allowed what e-commerce have done to the retailing arena. Changing our entire ecosystem is by no means easy, but I believe highly achievable with appropriate industry partnerships complemented by government policies and actions. And we see this beginning to happen, especially in the area of digital trade facilitation and the development of standards and governance for data exchange and transference. Again, half empty, half full, but I see it as half full and filling. Because from the PSA perspective, we have been participating and in some cases helped to lead in initiatives that are rolled out in the supply chain community at local and even global levels. Talk first about the local level. At port-related level, port communities are important. And we have many years of port community platform experience in Singapore. Our well-known or relatively well-known PortNet system, which started in the 1980s, have connected port users to our port to handle all the various activities and exchanges between the port community and the port for many decades. And we have now made it available as a software that can be implemented in other global ports to serve the local communities there by setting up community workflow, analytics, simple things like notifications, and more complex things like interconnecting ports and terminals. This is then complemented with specific local applications. As an example, at PSA Mumbai, we partner with Odex to offer direct port delivery customers the ability to make digital online payments. So we see the need for port community as an infrastructure layer, hence then allowing innovative partners to build applications to solve problems in a smarter way. Then at a global community level, the challenge is bigger, but to some extent similar. And what we then need is data exchange infrastructure. And as PSA, we've been working on collaborations and partnerships on tackling this, for instance, in groups like GSBN and with parties like TradeLens, DCSA. Now we see this as building a global data infrastructure to support digital trade and supply chain ecosystems, covering businesses, governments, and trade communities. We see that in the future, such data infrastructure will enable innovation and support the development of industry applications in a coherent manner. It is not for the lack of creativity, but the lack of coherent standards and the ability to embed on good infrastructure that allows these applications to really play to their strengths. As these infrastructures are created, in PSA, we're also developing platforms that sit on them, like Callista, which is a global digital platform that facilitates trades and helps shippers to better manage the physical movement of goods, trade financing, and compliance. Bharat mentioned that I was the co-chair of the Emerging Stronger Task Force, which identified a number of key areas that Singapore needed to work on and continues to work on for the recovery through the COVID pandemic. One of them is supply chain digitalization. And in that task force, we identified a national data infrastructure as being a necessary requirement or something that we cannot avoid in the future. That is a must-have. And we are one of the founding partners of something that was incorporated a couple of months ago called SG TradeX. It's a unique public-private partnership with the public holding 40% shareholding and private companies holding 60%, where the technology and the infrastructure is built and hosted by the government, and the applications, use cases, the rules, and the interactivity are all promoted by the public sector, the private sector with public support. So it's an interoperable common data infrastructure that provides a common data highway. And just to give you something more specific, this infrastructure is addressing 3 common problems now: strengthening trade finance, decongesting container flow and their nodes, and bunker optimization in Singapore. Now, of course, while it addresses the challenges from the Singapore perspective, it involves players not just from Singapore, but certainly from around the world. And the second step is to enable more sustainable world trade where supply chain users can make greener and smarter choices. So first, sustainability, and the other is supply chain users making better choices. And as I mentioned earlier, we will all be compelled to tackle our scopes 1 and 2 emissions to keep our license to operate. But I see more and more companies taking this seriously already, and more will certainly need to be done in the areas of, for instance, new energy for industry and for global shipping. Initiatives such as Getting to Zero Coalition, which is industry-led and championed by the Global Maritime Forum, the World Economic Forum, and the Friends of Ocean Action, which convenes around 200 stakeholders from across shipping and fuels value chain, is a great positive example. The Coalition for Future Energy, championed by CMA CGM, is another good example. But while these initiatives address the type of energy we will need to use in future to transport goods, I believe that equally, if not more important, are other initiatives that addresses the way in which energy is used by our supply chain users in the end-to-end supply chain. This means all of us taking an interest in Scope 3 emissions, which needs us to know the activities of our suppliers and customers. Now, we will need some time to learn how to achieve this in an orderly manner. New rules will need to be formed. And new initiatives such as the First Movers Coalition to aggregate strong buyer interest in future sustainable solutions are absolutely key. So the space of partnership increases. The buyer's voice is in the room, the supplier's voice is also in the room, and the technology enablers are also part of the whole system. Now, certainly one where there are many different diverse interests, and the things that will be needed to bring convergence will be new rules and new abilities we have yet to define and discover. But amidst all this, I believe carbon will be a new currency in this new world, allowing the exchange of solutions and credits between diverse parties. But this will need to be underpinned by the right market mechanisms so that supply chain users can count the cost of carbon and make better choices for their supply chain options. As an initial humble step for PSA, we want climate-conscious supply chain users working with us to know their CO2 impact from their logistic choices. For instance, to reduce carbon emissions, we offer our customers greener option of moving cargo by rail or barges instead of trucks. And this is happening in India, in Singapore, China, Canada, Belgium, Italy, other parts of Europe. And we want to create the ability to evaluate this positive impact on reducing carbon emissions credibly and reliably so that we can scale and we can help our supply chain users to achieve the CO2 mitigation that they aim for and they commit to. Climate change is a challenge that is bigger than COVID and one that is going to affect everyone, from individuals to business and governments. So we all need to approach this challenge with urgency and efficiency, and we need to have an open mind. Putting aside somewhat our inherent competitive nature and to create a space where we can innovate together in a proper manner in order to create the solutions needed for the future. Now, both of these steps, digitalization and sustainability, are not mutually exclusive, but in fact, highly interdependent. With digitalization comes new knowledge, new capability, and with sustainability comes new rules and new requirements. And I think we will be balancing between these two drivers of transformation for many years to come. So those are my few brief words. And Bharat, back to you, and we can get into a dialogue.
Thank you ever so much, Mr. Dan, for that absolutely riveting vignette into trying to make sense of for us of the world. And you, of course, have a vantage point, not only from your corner office at PSA, but also as part of Singapore's task force of building back better. So thank you so much, sir. So, I've prepared a few questions, and I promise that I've done my very best to catch you off guard. But by whatever little I have heard, in some ways you've preempted anything I could have, everything I could have thought of. Before I launch into the questions, I must say I'm very thankful to PSA for offering your customers greener choices. And I say this half in jest, but part of what we do is we run a private railway business in India, both container and automotive trains. And it's absolutely spectacular that in Singapore, with your sort of spread geographically, you're already offering barge as well as rail instead of trucking. And in India, we're agonizing over how many 100 kilometers should be cut off to shift the mode from road to rail and so on. So clearly for all of those somewhat academic, purely academic arguments, I think I'll just point to yourselves as an example. Sir, you had mentioned a bit about the disruptions in global supply chains caused due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And as you mentioned, there's a litany of contributing factors to this spiraling cost of container freight, and it includes the clogging of containers in seaports around the world and inland ports indeed, the shortage of wooden pallets, the congestion and blockages in the production system, shortages of even truck drivers, constraints consequently on warehousing capacity, and it goes on and on. And in spite of this, in some ways, these are not new challenges, as you pointed out correctly. There were perhaps underlying and pre-existing issues which have been brought to the fore and sharpened under the pandemic. So, sir, what in your view should be the focus of global businesses to ease these bottlenecks, and what is PSA doing in Singapore and around the world in this regard?
Well, thanks, Bharat, for the question. While I've set the general context, I think your question causes us to ponder deeper as to what is really happening. And it's really happening in waves still. So we don't think of the pandemic as uniform. We don't think as getting to endemicity as being simple and straightforward. Because through the length of the pandemic, what has happened is that workers' behavior has also changed. Expectations have become different. I'm not just talking about the work from home and work in office dilemma, but the whole ethos of why people work after 2 to 3 years could also be up for question. And so I think we have to first address within our own community why we come to work. It sounds funny, but it's actually important. In some places in the world, we have to impress on our workers to work overtime quite significantly. Because the capacity of a port, other than the nameplate, it is so many million TEU, is anything but a single number. It is what you do with the equipment you have. It's dealing with the containers that are situated in your yard. It could be congested. It could be piling up 5 high and making things difficult to sort and all that. And it really requires our people to go the extra mile. So we have found that aside from obvious medical processes, medical instructed processes to say you must do this when you show up and be safe through the different waves of the pandemic, it's working on our people to encourage them to think of them being the unsung heroes. That because they come to work, we keep supply chain going. Now we believe the same must also take place for the truckers that move the boxes in and out of ports, in and out of warehouses, at the different levels of what I call the hub and flow. Because every place is a hub and every movement is a flow. And they must all somehow work together. I think we can tweak the processes. We can also tweak the the motivations, encourage people with more incentive and so on and so forth. But we need to rebuild back the purpose of why we do what we do for our ecosystem. I'm happy to say that within PSA, we've somehow managed this relatively well. And we monitor on a regular basis the actual capacity that a port is operating at, whether it's at 90% or 100%. And we see all these factors in play. And the hardest to solve are usually the people-related factors. We have not found an issue getting our reliability at the right level in terms of machine maintenance. We have not found the inability to plan with like-minded partners like shipping lines, and we say this is the best way to prioritize the movement of a box and so on. And I'm hopeful that when we get back to endemicity, we will be positively motivated to really make the world work even better than before. And that starts with every worker. Now, I'm not going on about the worker part quite a bit, but I see this as one of the big challenges. There is a moment for leaders to really lead people out of the disruption.
Thank you so much, sir, for that. And you've just articulated all of these incredible things, and I want to very much plagiarize and reuse all my learnings from this interaction. I just love what you said about how getting to endemicity will not be linear. We'll get there, but it won't happen in a straight line. And also, very much, I think, about your point about people-related issues are just so complex. And in some ways, one of your, esteemed cabinet ministers said this pre-pandemic when he said, and I quote, that companies are living longer and people are living longer and companies are living shorter. And this was so prophetic because under the pandemic we've seen this phenomenon of the Great Resignation. So there are all kinds of incredible behavioral challenges. And thirdly, I just also liked how you you tweaked a little bit the hub and spoke to the hub and flow, which in many ways I think is just so much more expansive, because it's not necessarily a certain supply chain architecture, but much beyond that. So let me ask you a question then on flow, and this relates partly to digitization, which we both agreed is something the world is now racing to adopt, and emerging technologies like AI and blockchain are of course further fueling this. And this phenomenon of now what is called tech acceleration, where the world has been under the pandemic more accepting to accept or adopt tech, has also played its part. However, cross-country differentials in the speed and the nature of these adoptions could continue to hamper the easing of bottlenecks, and adjustments might have to be made and also embraced. So what could we do to mitigate risks, and what are the three top government and business tasks that need to be done to maintain the seamless flow in supply chains? Thank you.
Okay. Well, before I address the few things that countries can tackle to support and ensure seamless flow in supply chain, let's start by first asking ourselves what can we do as individual companies to adopt better technology and to use the new tools like blockchain and AI, because I think you can start with us before we say, I want to connect, what can you do, right? Governments. I think all of us, whatever part of supply chain we sit in, do find ourselves sitting on enough information to help ourselves, to help others to become more productive. And it's a question of organizing that information and looking at it hard enough. And then setting the problem statements that actually make a difference to how customers are served. So to give you an example, a few years ago, we started on this quest of asking ourselves, what data do we have? Imperfect it might be, but with AI, it helps us to patch imperfect data to make it more sensible data. And then globally, we set out a challenge that our teams in different terminals can create projects to use data and together with partners formulate innovative solutions. And one gem that came out of it is something called NMOT, or next mode of transport. It sounds a bit awkward, but actually very meaningful. Because imagine containers being brought into a terminal, and for a multimodal terminal could then be taken out by truck or by barge or by rail. It makes quite a lot of difference how you stage the container for the next mode of action. And if you stage it in the wrong place, you end up having to move it again to prepare it for the movement of choice. So you put it to the rail yard and it ends up being required at a barge yard. I mean, it's something quite simple. It's just wrong. And so by delving into the data without the knowledge of the cargo and so on, which actually at a port level we don't receive, by looking at patterns, we are actually able to, over time, have more than a 90% reliability of predicting what the next mode of transport would be. And imagine what that does in terms of reducing unnecessary movements, getting productivity, reducing fuel usage, and time, of course. Now, then you escalate this to a higher level and say, if we can do this as an imperfect single party, how can we do this if we can encourage more diverse stakeholders within an ecosystem to come together? And so that's why SG TradeX was formed to address, because we found that, like in the first use case, trade finance, there was a non-convergence of the information that was needed for trade finance coming from the financial side and the physical part of the cargo. And we all know that if there is the intention to abuse, it is possible to be fraudulent in getting trade finance from either non-existent cargo and so on. And so is it then possible to ensure that the financial and the physical aspects of data can be made available and exchanged real time, so that all parties are actually reassured of a healthy functioning environment? It's difficult for people to do things the wrong way. The same it is with the second use case, node decongestion. Between the depots and the port and the shipping lines and the cargo consumers, how can we see to it that no truck is set forth onto the road knowing that there's a queue at the other end, not expecting your arrival? It's like Google Map. I mean, today we see that it is possible in the B2C environment, the open source environment, and yet so difficult to create in a B2B competition-based environment. But if government can then step in and provide the ground rules that allow for safe sharing and commercially, how should I call it, supported exchange of data, could we then have enough information, though imperfect, but just, I mean, the things that you get from your phone on Google Map is actually imperfect, but it's enough for us to operate better than before. And so the right infrastructure, the right rules, and the right regulatory environment, the ability to use digital documents that is accepted in the courts of law, for instance, that Singapore has adopted. So I think we need infrastructure to allow this ecosystem to interact, for system operability, compatibility, cybersecurity, so that if I were to interface with a particular system, I have a confidence that the cybersecurity aspects and dimensions are covered, and so on and so forth. So infrastructure, rules, and law. I think government will have to look at that. And the pace is increasing because people are also interested in creating digitally enabled trade agreements. And they have to then deal with things like, how do we individually treat data flows and documents and so on. So it's inevitable that if we want to look at the future of trade through digital means, governments will have to address this, I believe. And as businesses, we should not stand by and watch. We should actually participate so that the new environment which is built is suitable for businesses, as opposed to the last decades of business where we have adopted things written for us, and somehow for the lack of a better alternative, just continue to use whatever is imperfect.
Dealing with an imperfect world is something which Indians know a little bit about. So your point is certainly not being missed, on this side of the virtual pipe. And also, sir, what you said, I think is, absolutely fantastic about how AI has the power to patch imperfect data sets. In our experience in India, we've seen the power of ecosystems and how they develop, and often organically to the surprise and delight of everybody around it. And the most famous example of this is something called the India Stack, where an ecosystem of great multitude just somehow arose around the Aadhaar, or the unique individual ID program. So Aadhaar provided, the platform or the backbone for this. And then, a lot of different startups emerged. And sticking with this point for a moment, we also see now startups in the logistics and supply chain space emerging as key players and solution providers with innovation and technology at the very heart of their solutions. What sort of disruptions do we envisage as we emerge from this pandemic, and how can startups work with governments to build resilient supply chains? And one other more serious question, how can old economy businesses like ours match the valuation of startups? That's an optional question, but the first one is forward. Thank you.
Well, the second one certainly has a lot of people studying, analyzing, and even sometimes betting their farm on it. But the first one, very, very interesting. I would say there are two themes where startups can really make a huge difference. And one is in the area of optimization of resources. Now, logistics is really about putting the right resource to the right place at the right time and hopefully come up with an optimum solution. Shortest, cheapest, whatever it is that your optimizing function is, and in future, maybe minimum CO2. So what resource do we want to minimize while maximizing the outcome? And we have already seen some of these startups in the consumer space. To me, a company like Uber, Grab, they actually allow the allocation of resource to a point of need in a very specific manner. Has it come into the commercial space in a big way? Well, yes and no. They've come, but because the commercial space is very fragmented. So we've got thousands of trucking companies in India, for instance, right? In Singapore, we are not thousands, but we are still 260 trucking companies. And 60% of them have less than 10 trucks, each company. Okay, so it does say that we need good solutions to be able to help SMEs move forward. And allocation of resource, optimization of resource will be one theme where if startups can really make a difference. The other place where I believe startups can make a difference is in creating more transparency. And whether it's transparency of the movement itself, transparency of meeting a compliance requirement, of meeting a financial requirement. In future, the transparency of what would be the energy used, the carbon emitted, the baseline versus the actual. Those type of startups that allow us to control beyond track and trace, beyond knowledge, and I think will also be quite valuable. Now, if you then look at, we were talking about Unbox earlier, the investments in Unbox do have repeated themes, or do have repeated subsidiary companies in these two buckets. And then on technology, the use of technology, I think we're just touching the surface on how mobility and energy are fully optimized. Now, we are seeing more deployment of electric powered vehicles, whether it's a crane or a truck. In Singapore, the Tuas port will be built without any prime mover that uses diesel. It will be entirely electric and automated. with automation and with electrification and with automation, we'll be very reliant on battery. And we will then be quite a big user on the energy grid. The other way of looking at it, if we can play a role in renewables mix and in the design of our batteries to balance our own moderated demand, we can also be a helper to the stability of the grid. Now, all this cannot happen without new technology, enabling us to optimize the available technology so that we are able to reduce our, how should I call it, cost of operation, be it a CO2 cost or a financial cost, while achieving broader sets of goals, supply chain and energy. Now, I just highlight this as one example in terms of the technology area, because often when we think of startups, we think of digital unicorns. As an engineering background, I'm really delighted and excited when we can really break through in an area that can be applied with some scale in an area that addresses some of the fundamental things that we've been doing for decades, but need a game changer, like the way we handle energy optimization. So just a few brief thoughts about how startups can make a difference in our total business area.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And you mentioned how 60% of Singapore's trucking companies account for a fleet size of less than 10 trucks, and you say it like it's something to be embarrassed about. But in India, something like 95%, it could be even more, so I'm not exaggerating, something like 95% of our trucks are owner driven. So that's one company, one truck. So, well, but that is also, an ecosystem as we were discussing. So I'm afraid we might have time for just one last question, and just a related question, if you allow us, on e-commerce and the strong growth of e-commerce with the increasing use of technology and equally the growing demand for end-to-end solutions. Now, as a global player, how do you see the logistics space evolving, and what are the 3 areas where industries and countries in the region could partner? Thank you.
Well, I think e-commerce growing is a natural thing. Its trajectory is still positive and quite steep. And I think the industry very casually says, yeah, we're moving from B2C e-commerce to B2C plus B2B. We are going from parcels to larger pallet size, from single shipment to staging and addressing a market area. And so just like the ride hailing, I think initially ride hailing is much more about the single individual's need. I hope in future they will handle pools, car pools, or transport pooling, so that we can really make full use of the planning capability of ride hailing to reduce carbon footprint for everybody. Shared transport. Shared transport is easier said than done. The same it is with e-commerce. It starts out as, I want to satisfy what you want within a single day, within a few days. But e-commerce as a concept has taken hold, and people are willing to wait beyond a few days. And now we are forced to anyway. And so once people are willing to wait beyond a few days, it just represents a different way of communicating to your supplier exactly what you want to buy. Instead of walking into a store, getting it immediately, it's just a different way of forming that transaction. And once people allow 7 days, 10 days, and in some cases, some of the e-commerce sites will say 25 days. What's the difference, right? But people have become used to different transaction mode, and that allows more goods to be moved under that umbrella, and indeed allows you to stage, allows you to plan almost like a more conventional supply chain planning system. I see sort of, it's like online, offline retail, and now omni-channel. And I see e-commerce parcel, the conventional supply chain management aspects of large BCOs, fashion management, consumer goods management, to something in between. And all this requires, I hope, similar assets used in a different way. It'll be tragic if we build all new assets and facilities just because the same transaction takes place differently. We should learn how to do things differently. And I also hope that when we do things differently, it'll be with measurable outcomes that can inform us whether we are doing it better, whether it's truly an improvement on the past, or is it just to satisfy a consumer behavior change. That's what I see is our collective challenge. We should support, we should promote, but we should continue to tweak it. And the text signals, the industry pricing signals should hopefully move us into driving the optimal outcome. If we want to go carpooling, let's incentivize carpooling. If we want to have, say, B2C e-commerce that is actually sustainable, then the rules should encourage it to be done in such a way that it is sustainable. Now, as businesses, we can. Today, we have done e-commerce movements in containers where there's 100,000 parcels in a single container, and be able to work with customs to actually go through them and clear them, and even do sea-to-air intermodality through different hubs. When air hubs are congested, we can move to another sea hub to attach to a different air hub and move it accordingly. But we just lack the complete system to evaluate whether that's a better world. It's better business, but is it a better world? Anyway, I'm maybe being philosophical, but I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to, as I said, between digitalization, sustainability, and new practices, to work around and within it, such that we hopefully all work together to discover that better world, more sustainable trade.
Thank you so much, sir, for that. And in fact, not purely philosophical as well, because the 2 or 3 things you mentioned are actually subjects of great public debate in India at the moment, at least on Twitter. And there is a discussion amongst investors about how much of this instant gratification is consumer behavior and how much of it is sort of our fault. And a case in point is billions of US dollars currently being spent in this country to give a consumer experience for your local groceries to be delivered not in 24 but in 14 hours. So the discussion is, look, what do you achieve with doing this? And you're right. I think as we move towards more responsible investing and more responsible consumption, some of these might be questioned. In Delhi, for instance, where I live, and I've tried this personally in the pre-COVID era, Uber and other Ola and other ride-hailing apps were providing the carpool service as well. So of course we'll have to wait for this safety and endemic, pandemic, all of this to iron out, but perhaps that'll come back. I won't even attempt to summarize the absolutely fascinating 360 view you've given us of so many issues just through the prism of supply chain. But I will take advantage of my very pleasant responsibility to deliver a vote of thanks to you for your time. And let me propose to CII and to Gargi that when Mr. Tan is invited for the 28th edition of the Partnership Summit, we must have at least 90 minutes or 120, because an hour is still not enough for this fabulously engaging discourse. So thank you to you for joining us. Thank you
very much, Bharat. Thanks everybody for listening in. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank
All
you.
the best and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, for facilitating
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gargi, for your support. Thanks, Matt and Yong Kiam, really, for the preparation.
Always.
Very well.
Please happy to be there. Please reach out whenever anything.
Okay.
I'm right here in Singapore, so your point. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye. Great day.